It was March 19th, 1969. New York City was buried under the last snow of winter, but inside the Dakota Building, something far colder was happening. John Lennon sat alone in the corner of his recording studio, staring at nothing. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from drugs, not from exhaustion, from something much worse. The meeting had ended 2 hours ago, but John hadn't moved. He couldn't. The words his bandmates had said kept echoing in his head like a broken record he couldn't turn off. "You've changed, John. This isn't the Beatles anymore. Maybe we need to take a break." 20 minutes earlier, Yoko Ono had returned from an art gallery meeting in Soho. She expected to find John working on a new song, smoking his usual cigarettes, maybe arguing with someone on the phone about publishing rights. Instead, she found silence. A silence so heavy, it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. "John?" she called out, setting down her portfolio. No answer. She walked through their apartment, past the white grand piano, past the walls covered with protest posters and unfinished artwork. The studio door was slightly open. That's when she heard it, a sound she'd never heard before in all the months they'd been together. John Lennon was crying. Not just crying, sobbing. The kind of desperate, broken crying that comes from somewhere deep in the soul. Yoko pushed the door open slowly. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. John was curled up on the floor, his back against the wall, his iconic glasses lying broken beside him. His face was buried in his hands, and his entire body was shaking with the force of his tears. On the coffee table in front of him lay a stack of papers, legal documents, meeting notes, and a photograph of 4 young men from Liverpool who used to believe they could change the world. Yoko didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, watching the man the world called a genius, the man millions idolized, completely falling apart. "They hate me," John finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "They actually hate me now." Yoko walked over and sat down beside him on the cold studio floor. She didn't try to hug him, didn't tell him everything would be okay, didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, she did something that would save John's sanity and change both their lives forever. She picked up his broken glasses, looked at them for a long moment, and said just 5 words. "Then we build something new." To understand what happened that March evening, you need to know what occurred earlier that day at Apple Corps headquarters in London. The Beatles were supposed to be discussing their next album. Instead, they were destroying each other. Paul McCartney had arrived first, as always, with typed notes and a clear agenda. He wanted to talk about production schedules, song arrangements, and getting back to basics. George Harrison came in 20 minutes late, carrying his sitar and barely making eye contact with anyone. Ringo Starr sat quietly in the corner, knowing what was coming, and John arrived last, with Yoko by his side. That was the first problem. "Does she have to be here?" Paul had asked, not even trying to hide his irritation. "She's with me," John replied, coldly. "Where I go, she goes. This is a Beatles meeting, John, just the 4 of us." "Then I'm not staying." The argument that followed was brutal. Paul accused John of abandoning the band for a relationship. George said John had become impossible to work with. Even Ringo, always the peacemaker, admitted that things couldn't continue like this. But the moment that broke John came when Paul said something he could never take back. "You've let her change you, John. The John Lennon I knew died the day she walked into your life." The room went silent. John stood up, his face white with rage and hurt. "The John Lennon you knew was dying long before Yoko. You just never bothered to notice." He walked out. Yoko followed. They caught the next flight to New York. John didn't say a single word during the entire 8-hour flight. He just stared out the window, watching the clouds pass by, wondering how the 4 boys who started with nothing had ended up with everything and lost each other anyway. "Hey, Before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. Back in the Dakota Building studio, Yoko sat beside John in silence for what felt like hours. Outside, New York City was coming alive with evening traffic and distant sirens. Inside, John Lennon was dying a slow death. "I gave them everything," John finally said, his voice hoarse from crying. "Every song, every idea, every piece of myself. And now they look at me like I'm the enemy." Yoko didn't interrupt. She'd learned early in their relationship that John didn't need solutions when he was hurting. He needed to be heard. "Paul thinks I've changed. George thinks I've abandoned them. Ringo just wants everyone to get along. But even he's tired of me." John picked up one of the legal documents from the table. His hand was still shaking. "They want to vote on whether Yoko can be in the studio during recordings. Can you believe that? They want to vote on whether my wife can be near me while I work." "And what did you say?" Yoko asked quietly. "I told them if she's not welcome, then neither am I." Yoko closed her eyes. She knew what that meant. She knew what John was choosing to sacrifice for her. "John, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was suddenly fierce, almost angry. "I spent 10 years being what they needed me to be. The funny one, the clever one, the one with the words. But nobody ever asked what I needed." He turned to look at her, and Yoko saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Raw, unfiltered fear. "What if they're right?" John whispered. "What if I'm losing my mind? What if everything I've built means nothing without them?" This was the moment Yoko had been preparing for without even knowing it. She stood up, walked to John's piano, and placed her hands on the keys. "Play something with me," she said. "Yoko, I can't. I don't play." It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. John slowly got up from the floor, wiped his eyes, and sat down beside her at the piano. "What do you want me to play?" "Whatever comes from here," Yoko said, placing her hand over his heart. "Not from what the Beatles need. Not from what the world expects. From the part of you that's been screaming to get out." John's fingers touched the keys, and what came out wasn't a Beatles song. It wasn't a polished melody or a perfect arrangement. It was raw, painful, honest. It was the sound of a man breaking free from a cage he'd built for himself. They played until 3 in the morning. Not songs, not really, just sounds. Emotions translated into music. Yoko would make strange vocal sounds, and John would find chords that matched them. John would play a haunting melody, and Yoko would add avant-garde percussion. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was the first time in years that John Lennon felt like himself. Around midnight, John stopped playing and turned to Yoko. "I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone." Yoko waited. "I've been afraid every single day since the Beatles became famous. Afraid that one day people would wake up and realize I'm just some kid from Liverpool who got lucky. Afraid that the music would stop coming. Afraid that without the band, I'm nothing." He paused, his voice breaking again. "And now the band is falling apart, and I'm terrified that everyone was right, that I am nothing without them." Yoko looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that would echo in John's mind for the rest of his life. "John, the Beatles happened because of you, not the other way around. You weren't made by the band. The band was made by you, all 4 of you. But you especially." "That's not..." Listen to me, Yoko's voice was firm now. The world fell in love with the Beatles because you showed them it was okay to be different, to question things, to imagine something better. That wasn't the Beatles. That was John Lennon. John shook his head. Paul wrote just as many hits. George is a better guitarist. Ringo. Paul wrote beautiful songs, Yoko interrupted. But you wrote songs that changed people. There's a difference. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the New York skyline. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's been carrying the weight of other people's expectations for so long that you've forgotten who you are without them. Maybe I don't know who I am without them, John admitted quietly. Then let's find out. Over the next 3 days, John barely left the studio. He and Yoko worked around the clock, creating music that was unlike anything the Beatles had ever done. It was experimental, strange, provocative. Some of it was brilliant, some of it was terrible, but all of it was honest. On the third night, the phone rang. It was Paul. "We need to talk," Paul said, his voice strained. "I don't know if I can do this right now," John replied. "John, please. Let's meet. Just you and me. No lawyers, no Yoko, no George or Ringo. Just us, like the old days." John looked at Yoko. She nodded, understanding what he needed to do. "Okay," John said finally. "Tomorrow, noon, Central Park." The next day was unseasonably warm for March. John arrived at Strawberry Fields, though it wouldn't officially be named that for another 16 years, and found Paul already waiting on a bench. They sat in silence for several minutes. "I'm sorry," Paul finally said. "What I said in London, I was out of line." "You meant it," John replied quietly. "Some of it, maybe, but not all of it. I don't think you're destroying the band, John. I think we're all destroying it together. We just don't know how to stop." John pulled out a cigarette and lit it. "Maybe we're not supposed to stop it. Maybe this is just the end." Paul looked stricken. "Don't say that." "Why not? We can't stand to be in the same room anymore, Paul. You hate Yoko. George is barely talking to either of us. Ringo's caught in the middle. What's the point of forcing something that's already dead?" "It's not dead," Paul insisted. "It's just different now." "Exactly. It's different. We're different. I'm different." Paul was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" he asked finally. "With Yoko? With New York? With all of this?" John took a long drag from his cigarette. "I don't know if I'm happy, but I'm finally being honest. That has to count for something." What happened next would become one of the most important conversations in rock and roll history. Paul told John that he was scared too. Scared of losing the band. Scared of the future. Scared that everything they'd built together would be reduced to legal battles and bitter memories. John told Paul that he couldn't keep pretending to be someone he wasn't just to keep the peace. They talked for 2 hours. They didn't solve anything, but they understood each other a little better. As they prepared to leave, Paul said something John would never forget. "Whatever happens with the band, mate, don't lose yourself trying to prove something to us. We were lucky to have you, but you don't owe us your sanity." John returned to the Dakota building just as the sun was setting. Yoko was in the studio, working on a new art piece. "How did it go?" she asked. "I don't know," John said honestly. "We talked. We didn't fix anything. But maybe that's okay." He sat down at the piano and played a few notes. "Yoko, I've been thinking about what you said, about finding out who I am without them. And I think I've been John Lennon the Beatle for so long that I forgot there was supposed to be just John." Yoko smiled. "So what are you going to do about it?" Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. John stopped trying to be what the Beatles needed him to be. He stopped trying to write perfect pop songs that would satisfy everyone. He stopped carrying the weight of expectations that had been crushing him for years. Instead, he started creating art. Real art. Messy, imperfect, deeply personal art. He and Yoko recorded experimental albums that critics hated and fans didn't understand. They staged controversial art installations. They spoke out about peace and politics in ways that made people uncomfortable. And slowly, John began to breathe again. The Beatles continued to fracture. Legal battles loomed. Friendships strained to the breaking point. But John Lennon was finding his sanity, not by holding on to what was dying, but by having the courage to let it go. It's been over 50 years since that night in March 1969 when Yoko found John crying in their studio. The Beatles officially broke up a year later. The legal battles lasted nearly a decade. The friendships took even longer to heal. But here's what most people don't know about that night. When Yoko sat beside John on that studio floor and said, "Then we build something new," she wasn't just talking about music. She was talking about identity, about having the courage to let go of who you've been, to discover who you're meant to become. John Lennon spent 10 years as a Beatle, and those years gave the world something beautiful. But the man who emerged after the Beatles, the activist, the artist, the father, the husband, that man gave the world something even more important: permission to evolve, permission to outgrow even the things we love, permission to choose our own sanity over other people's expectations. In interviews years later, John would say that the night Yoko found him crying was the night he stopped being a Beatle and started being himself. "She didn't try to fix me," John said. "She didn't tell me everything would be okay. She just showed me that breaking isn't the same as being broken. Sometimes you have to fall apart to figure out how you're supposed to fit together." The Dakota Building still stands in New York City. If you visit Strawberry Fields in Central Park today, you'll see a memorial to John Lennon. Thousands of people visit every year to pay tribute to the music, the legacy, the legend. But very few of them know about the night that saved it all. The night Yoko Ono found John Lennon at his lowest point and reminded him that the end of one thing is always the beginning of something else. The night she saved his sanity by teaching him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself break. Because it's only when we shatter completely that we discover what we're truly made of. And what John Lennon was made of turned out to be so much more than even the Beatles could contain. If this story of courage, transformation, and choosing yourself over expectations moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to outgrow the things that once defined them. Have you ever had to let go of something you loved to find yourself? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about the moments that shaped music's greatest legends.